Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to use the Hero Arts Color Layer Octopus and create a card. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I really enjoy color layer stamps, and Hero Arts are one of my favorites. They're a great way to get lots of detail in your stamping, and they're perfect for people that don't necessarily love coloring, because the detail that you need comes with the different layers of stamps and you don't need to color the image afterwards. So I'm going to stamp my octopus the lightest color I have. I have 3 different shades of red, and I'm going to make it kind of an ombre effect. I'm going to start with the lightest color. I'm going to stamp the entire octopus, and I'm double stamping everything to make sure that I get a nice clear image. Once I've gotten a clear image with the lightest color, I'm going to take the medium shade of red and I'm going to ink about the top 2/3 of the stamp, and then I'm going to use a blending brush just to blend the edges of the ink out. I don't want to have any harsh lines from my ink pad, and just tapping that stamp with the blending brush will smooth out those lines and give a nice transition between the colors. I am going to double stamp this one as well and make sure that I get a nice clear distinction between the light and the middle shade of red. So I'll ink the top 2/3 with that same red color again, and then also use that blending brush just to blend that out and make sure once again that I don't have any harsh lines from my ink pad. If you've never used color layer stamps before, there is images on the back, so it shows you a card sample as well as how the different layers go together, so you don't have to do any guessing on your own. This particular octopus is really easy because there's only 2 different layers to it, but there are some that have 3 or 4 layers to them, so they do get a little bit more complicated. So my last layer of the red, I'm just inking the top 1/3 of the stamp, and then I'm using that same blending brush to blend that out once again so that I don't have the harsh lines, and I'm also doing that twice. Being able to do this in a Misti and make sure that that stamp is going to stamp in exactly the same spot every single time works perfectly. It's possible, but it would be a little bit more difficult to use with an acrylic block because each and every time you would have to try to line it up by sight, and by using a Misti or a stamp platform or some sort of stamp positioning tool, you don't have to worry about that stamp lining up. You know it's going to line up every single time. So now that that first layer is done, I cleaned my stamp off, going to put it back in the package, and then I'm lining up my second layer of the stamp. I have a darker color, aged mahogany, that I'm going to use. I'll have all the supplies and colors that I'm using listed and linked in the description box below. So if there's something that I happen to forget to mention, you'll probably find that information down there. Otherwise, leave a comment and ask the question. I'm happy to help. So once the second layer of the stamp is lined up, you can ink the stamp and stamp it. This just adds the outline and the detail to part of the stamp, and I don't think it's necessary to do that ombre as well. I'm also going to take one of the sentiments from the set, and I love how these layer sets include sentiments that are kind of appropriate for the theme. So the one that I chose is I'm a Sucker for You, and I'm going to stamp it with the dark shade of red that I used with the first layer. I don't want it as dark as the detail from the second layer, but I do want to have a nice bright red. Once I've stamped that with the red, I'm going to take the silhouette as well as that stamp sentiment, and I'm going to stamp it and emboss it with Versamark and some clear embossing powder. I want to do some inking on the back for the ocean, and by using Versamark and embossing with clear powder, I'm still going to see all the detail and the color of the stamp, but I'm not going to mar the color with the color that I'm putting on the background, so I can make sure to have a nice crisp image still by protecting it with that embossing powder. Now, even with clear stamps, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to make sure that it's lined up correctly, but by having a Misti or a stamping tool, I can do that with a clean stamp and make sure that I have as close a possible alignment, and know that when I go and ink the stamp and stamp it, I'm going to have it as close as possible. It just makes it a little bit easier to do when you have a Misti tool to do this, rather than trying to stamp something in exact position with an inked stamp and an acrylic block. And just like the colored ink pads, I am stamping it twice to make sure that I get a nice, well-inked image for my embossing powder to stick to. Once that's double stamped, I can use my embossing powder and pour it over, and it's going to stick to that embossing ink. And once that is completely covered, I'm going to use my embossing tool and I'm going to melt that powder. An embossing tool, if you've never done embossing before, it emits heat and will melt that powder where it is. You don't want to use a hair dryer or anything like that because that blows air, and what that will do is just dry your ink and blow your powder off. So you definitely do need a specific tool for this. An embossing tool or a heated tool will work. A heated tool is more meant for drying things, but it will work for embossing. It'll just take a little bit longer than an embossing tool, just because the tool specifically for embossing is a little bit higher heat and it concentrates the air just a little bit more. But you can see how as the powder is melting, it goes from kind of a frosty granular look to a glossy clear look. And that color and vibrance of the octopus really comes through. And I really love how that ombre looks on this stamp. I think it looks really, really cool. Once all that embossing is melted, I'm going to let that dry for a few seconds, and then I'm taking some distress ink pads and I'm just kind of streaking them across the surface of the paper. I want them going from side to side to kind of emulate like waves or water in the ocean. I'm not waving them, I'm just doing straight lines across, but I'm doing that kind of as an ombre as well. I'm starting with a lighter at the top, going a little bit darker as we go down. You'll see that it kind of creates a little bit of a halo around the octopus. Once I've got all the ink that I want on here, I'm going to use a Mr. bottle with some Perfect Pearls, and I'm going to spray that. That is going to help blend the different ink colors together, and it's also going to create a beautiful shimmer on our background of our card. And because that octopus and that sentiment is embossed, it's keeping its color and vibrancy, and it's also going to resist the shimmer spray as well. So we're getting a nice contrast between the clear shiny on the octopus and the shimmer on the water part of the back of the card. You can spray it as much or as little as you want. Once it's sprayed, you need to leave it and let it dry completely before that we assemble the card. If you were to try to assemble the card while it's still wet, the glue wouldn't stick. If you happen to have droplets of the spray on your octopus, you can just use a paper towel to blot that off. It comes off really, really easily. And by blotting that off, you're not taking anything away from the background. You're not going to be blotting it off of the background because it does soak into the paper quite quickly. If you want to speed up the process, you can use a heated tool, and that's what I'm using here. As I said before, a heated tool is more meant for drying things, so it's perfect for an instance like this where we're just trying to dry the background. A heated tool is a nice, gentle heat, so it's not as hot as an embossing tool. If I were to concentrate the tool right across the octopus and the sentiment, I will start to remelt that powder, but I'm moving it over to kind of disperse the heat just to dry that background. Once that's completely dry, I'm going to use some Distress Collage Medium and glue the layers of my card together. I just have a white card base, and then I chose a red mat to put around it. I thought it kind of framed and brought out the colors of the octopus and kind of highlighted those. I like to use Distress Collage Medium because it dries completely clear and it also dries matte. So if by chance anything happens to seep out from under the cardstock, you're never going to know that it was there. Once that has dried, I'm going to use the same Distress Collage Medium to glue down the octopus layer. I have a little bit wider of a mat on this particular card than I normally do just because I liked the way it looked on the card. If by chance you get a little bit of warping for your octopus layer, you can just put an acrylic block down on it to hold it down flat while it is drying. I love how this card turned out. I love the ombre of the octopus plus the ombre of the water and the different contrast between the clear embossing powder and the shimmer of the water. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.